Hello everyone, welcome back to History Surfer, or if this is your first time, welcome to History Surfer. This is Dr. A, and this is the lecture for my Renaissance to Contemporary class. It is lesson 3, and it's the Renaissance in Quatrocento, Italy. As you see here by this image, we're going to base this lecture really essentially, let me give you some extra space here. Sorry about that. I don't mean to cut the word off. It's essentially based on the city of Florence, although we can talk a little bit about other places, because Florence is the fountainhead for, it's the well of the ideas and the things that happen in Renaissance Italy. And as you can see here, it is a republic. Okay, so if you look at this map, that means a little bit of a different thing to them than it does to us. But just so you know, it's a republic dominated by the family of the Medici family. The Medicis were incredibly powerful, and they allowed for a lot of the things that happened in Florence. It was an incredible time for them. Sorry, I was trying to turn my phone off. It made some noise. Sorry about that. They had considerable influence, though, and it was really based on monetary reasons at first, but they were incredibly smart, if you will, that they also grabbed political power at the same time. They had a banking empire. And a lot of arguments have been made that the Republic of Florence was in fact more like a plutocracy, and that means the wealthiest individuals ruled. This is, I think this is a good argument, you could say that, but Cosimo de' Medici took advantage of many factors to make sure that his family prospered. He was gifted with some pretty good heirs. Pietro and Pietro's son Lorenzo the Magnificent carried on his ideas and took advantage of the things that really made this place special. So let's look at some of those things. They were functioning under a new philosophy called humanism, not new, but reincorporated. And Renaissance humanism, a little bit different from the Greek humanists. They have an interest in studying literature and art from antiquity. They also were interested in Latin and philology. There's quite a few of them who really have, real big interest in this. And if you read here, I'm not going to read to you, you'll see what that means. Education was emphasized, promotion of private and civic virtue, the rejection of the old medieval use of scholasticism. They encouraged many other things to be studied, and they also put an emphasis on the individual. It is a time when the idea of individual is born. The Florentine Republican ideal is everyone's to succeed and participate in government. They had a belief that artists, such as visual artists, writers, and poets, can lead humanity and give them a better way of living. So it's an enriching period for the arts. There's no doubt about that. The ability of Florence to take this spot, it can be argued, can be traced to the collapse of the Byzantine Empire in 1453. That was critical for many people because with that collapse, the Ottomans take over. You can see here what's left, the Constantinople. They invade. By that time, the Byzantine Empire was really much smaller than we imagine. I mean, it was huge at one point, but at this time it was just Constantinople, and you see here this smaller part here. When they conquer Constantinople, the capital of the Byzantine Empire. Many of the people who lived there that were intellectuals fled the city, and their migration, most of them focused on Italy. Italy was the place that benefited the most, if you will, from the fall of Constantinople. The greatest thing is they bought the remnants of all of the ancient, like from the classical period, learning. And people like Brunelleschi, who we're going to talk about in a later part of this lecture, he's going to really take advantage of that. It is you can demonstrate that just by looking at what happens. It's almost as if you can date the beginning of this really important time to the fall of Constantinople. So it's always kind of interesting to look at the bigger picture. The city of Florence then became the center of this new idea, this rebirth, if you will. And they benefited from all of these new or old ideas that were reimported, to them because of the fall of Constantinople. A really, really good idea for the Medicis was to promote building and the arts in Florence. Florence was ripe. It was the perfect spot for the Renaissance. The population was quite young due to the plague. They had lots of money. Oftentimes I've seen the Florentines described as proto-capitalists. And that new class that was rising, it was only possible because of the plague. And they have certainly taken that, and people like Dante and Boccaccio and Alighieri, all three of them would be important for the new Renaissance people to, have new ideas. The father of humanism, Petrarch, was alive just before this all happened. All of these things, they all mesh here. And that leads to this new type of art. So let's begin by talking about sculpture. Probably one of the most emblematic pieces done for this new period is the northern door of the baptistry for the cathedral in Florence, Santa Maria del Fiore, Il Duomo as it eventually is known. In Italy, the baptistry is always separate, or most of the time, it's like the majority, from the main church structure. And in Florence, it was definitely that way. They had a competition for people to come and design these new gates. And the two big competitors were definitely Brunelleschi and Lorenzo Ghiberti. In it, you're going to see some of the best work of Ghiberti and his use of this beautiful gold. Let's get a close up. Here's what it looks like. And there's where the cathedral is. That's the bell tower that Giotto designed. But here you see these gold doors that Michelangelo referred to as the gates of paradise. These 10 relief panels are some of the greatest works of the early Florentine sculptural period. They demonstrate that Florentine artists had mastered linear perspective, and this classical idiom is going to dominate in the next, 500 years. It'll just be something that's adopted, and we will see it again and again. I can't even tell you. It'll take a long time for that whole idea to wane away, if you will. Brunelleschi was really upset about his loss, and we're going to talk about him. But in actuality, maybe it was good that Ghiberti won, because then Brunelleschi could concentrate on architecture. These are the original doors, no, excuse me, the original doors were restored early in the 21st century, and they're now inside. So these are just, replicas of them. This is a pivotal moment in the history of the Renaissance. With the arrival of Donatello on the scene and the Medici patronage of Donatello, it is certainly clear that things are really different at this moment. Donatello is a sculptor who was extremely talented, and he will reinvent, excuse me, sorry, I didn't mean to change it that much. I didn't mean the focus to go like that. But he will invent relievo schiacciato, and that's a squashed relief. And Donatello was really in his prepubescent, age, very talented already. But this proves that he is going to be one of the greatest sculptors of the age. Donatello is about a generation before Michelangelo. And so he's not really as well known as Michelangelo for his David, but his David is really, in the early Renaissance, what we consider the symbol of the early Renaissance. His David is bronze, and it is the first freestanding life-size sculpture since the fall of Rome. It's not the one you think of. I know it's not, because most of my students don't know this one. He was more interested in how the body moved. He was not from a wealthy or prestigious family, but he lived in a time and a place that he could really access ancient Greek and Roman art, and he lived a long life. And certainly his view from the early Renaissance it's special in the big picture. This is his most famous piece, and he has an ability to make static material look dynamic. If you look at his David, and it was done, by the way, for Cosimo, and Cosimo will put him inside the courtyard in his house. You can see the contrapposto, that's the curve of the body, but we also see a David that's very youthful. And in his David, he wears this hat that is very typical of the Florentine world and that period. He's carrying a sword, not the you don't see the stone that he cast to kill Goliath. You see him attired, what little bit of clothing he has on. It's a hat, he has a sword in his hand, and he has on shoes. You're seeing a Florentine interpretation of what David looked like. He's youthful, he's elegant, and there's a certain sexuality here that a lot of people talk about. Well, Donatello, here's the facial view, is I think it's pretty much accepted that he is a homosexual. I think that a lot of scholars have accepted that fact. And it was the Medicis who saved him, because they protected him from any persecution for that. It was illegal to be a homosexual in this period. It wasn't to be a homosexual, but to practice sodomy. Let's put it that way. When you look at this Donatello, he's very casually resting his foot on the head of Goliath. But it's from the back that he has a sort of androgyny that bothers people sometimes. And also, he has a kind of, like I said, sexuality. And this feather, that's what this is, going up towards the V of his legs, is almost, if you will, poking fun at the people of Florence, because this is it's kind of a pointing towards his homosexuality. Let's put it that way. Of all the works he did, and he did a lot, but David is the one that's famous. But a lot of people argue that youth who represents the idea that God had to have intervened for him to be able to kill Goliath is perhaps too beautiful in a way. But it's his penitent Magdalene who is more poignant. Mary Magdalene, if you believe the stories, left after Christ's death and wandered in the wilderness for 30 years. So we see her here after she spent 30 years in the desert as a humanist. All right, this is the first part of the lecture. If you see her face here, it's very scary almost. But we're going to start with the second part here at Quatrocento. So I will meet you there.